Welcome back to Prop Talk, a property management podcast powered by ResMan. I'm Elizabeth Francisco, your host. I am the Chief Experience Officer at Inhabit, and I also like to think of myself as a ResMan OG.
Back in the day.
I know. And today, I might be joined by the other OG, even though we still argue about who's number one and number two as far as employees coming on board. But today, guys, we have something really special planned for you. I think it's super cool. We're going to be diving into the world of AI and its role in multifamily property management. From chatbots to big data, we're going to explore why is AI the biggest buzzword right now in the industry, and how could it be utilized? How should it be utilized? Will it be a game changer in the future for our industry? So our guest today we have joining us is Nick Olsen. He is the Chief Technology Officer of ResMan. And as I mentioned, he might be ResMan OG status, like 1 and 2. So I'm super excited to have Nick on today for no other reason is that as our career, as our engagement with ResMan and Inhabit, as things continue to evolve, I don't get to work with Nick one-on-one like I used to. So selfishly, like there wasn't an option not to do this in person. I'm just saying, because I was looking forward to it. So,
It's been a long time. We used to do a lot together all day long, and it's been a while.
Yeah.
So it's fun. This will be fun.
Yep. And long into the evenings. Don't read into that, but there was a lot of design time in the middle of the night.
Look, it takes a lot of hours to do what we did.
Yes, it did. So I think what's important too, and I want to dive into is, of course, I've had the advantage of working with you over the years and understanding just how your mind works. We wouldn't be where we are today at ResMan without you, without a doubt. I mean, you architected it. I think when I think about developers and how they come up through their careers, you've always had this different edge. I don't know if we had anything to do with that. I'm just gonna say maybe, but operationally speaking, where you go to on a user's behalf has always impressed me. And as we've been in the market, I can tell you that's one of the things that people to this day still compliment. Like it shows. So I do think you're a unique bird. Of course, I don't have that much access to a whole lot of other people outside of ResMan, but I definitely think you're a genius and a real wizard when it comes to all things tech.
Oh, well, thanks, Elizabeth.
Oh, is he blushing? If I don't
Maybe
get him
a
to
little
blush,
bit. Maybe a little bit.
but I'm not done trying because I'm gonna get him. I promise. But I couldn't think of anybody better to help me break down this topic today about the complexities of AI, and really breaking it down into something we can understand. Just for some context, where this idea came from about the podcast was really coming off the back of NMHC's OpTech event,
Right.
Being in the booth and just hearing the way operators and frontline professionals were utilizing the term, and how it's kind of a broad encompassing term, which made me really question, do people really understand it? What does it really mean? And then that's where I asked Nick to, I might have some insight on a project he's working on, but I'm like, would you be open to coming on and really helping? Because even for myself, I'm in technology and I don't even know that my perceptions of where it is and where it's going were accurate.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's an interesting topic because it's not anything that's new, but just the availability and what's happened in the last 18 months that's made it available to the normal consumer has suddenly turned it into this amazing new thing when the reality is it's been around for a really long time. But now our access to it is so much easier that allows us to really take advantage of the power of it. And if we can use it for good to be able to help us be more efficient, to be more productive, to get more done, I mean, we really can tap into that if we have it with us.
So are you saying it's ChatGPT's fault?
100%.
That's
they are what started this revolution for sure.
Well, and I think in our industry too, and we're going to dive in and chat about like, hey, how AI has really evolved. But I think obviously the pandemic really shook things up in the industry and our attitude and willingness to absorb and utilize technology. So we're going to dive into that. Just a little teaser. We're also going to talk about, okay, what does it mean for the industry? What does that mean for job security? Because I've also heard comments about that too. Of course, we're going to talk about some compliance stuff because we have to. And then even a little bit on the ethical side of tech. So whether you're a pro at tech or just curious about what AI is doing in our neck of the woods here in multifamily, this episode's for you. So let's get started and let's unwrap the mysteries of AI in property management. So thanks again for tuning in. It's going to be an enlightening ride, I assure you. So to kick us off, Nick, let's get started with just a little bit of history. Like, help our audience understand why Nick. Why are you here talking about this?
Yeah, so going back, man, to the beginning, as Elizabeth mentioned, and I think it was 2008 when you and I met originally, and I actually started on board just as a software developer for a property management company, right? And so we worked side by side, and we're developing a software in-house. And God, there's 15 years of experience, which feels like 30 years of experiences throughout that time.
I'm not going to admit to that for the record.
but from that point, I started out, and you mentioned, the approach that we took and the difference. I think I started out on the front lines, meeting with leasing agents, meeting with managers, meeting with regional managers, with you, and really trying to understand the needs that they had on a day-to-day basis, which I think changed the way the application that we developed and made it different than some of the others that are out there, because it was truly solving the specific needs that we saw on a day-to-day basis that they had. So that was where I started, and this was 2008, like I said. And then iteration over iteration, we went through multiple versions, went back to the drawing board a few times, started over, failed products, successful products, right? And there's been a whole slew of things that had happened. And then, toward the more recent, with the acquisition from Inhabit, right, we started to really bring in some of the other services that are provided to the multifamily industry, other products. And then I've had an opportunity to now, I oversee the development for multiple of those groups. And so able to see different platforms, how they interact, how we bring the data together, and how we actually build a more cohesive system that's not just 100% property management, but covers all of the basics that you need to run the business.
Don't read into this possibly being a soundbite for the future, because it totally is. But I'm just curious, because I don't know if I ever asked you, what led you to get into technology to begin with?
Oh man! So I back when I was
Inquiring minds want to know.
Oh jeez. So I remember when I was 8 or 9. We had a family friend that had a software company, and my parents saw that I was curious about computers, and so they had me talk to him, and he gave me this book, and I built some, I don't even know what it was. I think it was like some sort of dice game or something useless completely. And I built it, and I suddenly saw myself pivot, and I went from playing video games at that time to where I don't think I ever touched a video game after, because I
Really?
pivoted towards building, because I enjoyed the actual process of building and seeing something that you create manifested as opposed to just consuming it. So it goes back, man, like I said, I think I was 8 or 9. And then the number of stories that are involved in there, but I built software for my neighbor, for some other random person, right? And just different opportunities came up. And I built some things that, were, looking back on it, were horribly designed, but, gone through that process, went to college and actually understood the fundamentals of everything. But it was just that creative power that you have when you're writing in software, and to be able to see you're telling a computer to do something and it does it. It's exhilarating. It's either a love-hate relationship. You either love it or you hate it. And I just fell on the side of loving it.
Oh, well, that's cool. I did not realize that. Because that totally is reinforcing what I called you for the first couple of years, which was boy genius. I'm just saying. Not allowed to say that anymore. You have wife or kids. It's hard for me to accept.
That's fair. That's fair.
So if you think about, because the ResMan journey is a unique journey all in and of itself, and then the exposure you've had with all, we've probably, I think, the most integration partners in the industry. How has your experiences along the way really helped you prepare for taking on the challenges of AI? And maybe we should back up for a second and talk about the project I hinted to, because right now, if I understand correctly, talk to us first about, what are your projects right now? Like, what are you into within Inhabit, and then maybe talk about how your experiences have prepared you for that.
Sure. AI as it exists now, today, as we know it commercially, is starting to infiltrate every product that you can use, right? And if you'll notice things even in Microsoft Word or in Google or where have you, like you'll start seeing these things pop up. And so what we're trying to do is take that same type of approach to be able to start infusing AI into many different products. So, as an example, from a CRM platform perspective, we're looking at actually using AI to help assist the leasing agents, whether that be taking calls or responding to emails or
Mhm.
chats. Being able to have the automated response that's
Mhm.
intelligent based on all the information that we have available, so that your leasing agent can focus on the people at the property, and then the AI can focus
Yep.
on getting people into the property, right? So we're doing that side to sides of using AI to help generate content, maybe for marketing websites or for
Mm.
things that you need to do that you have to sit there and painstakingly figure out, well, how do I write this to make it sound intriguing or exciting? You can leverage AI to do that for you, go back and forth.
Mhm.
Or as well, even helping on the maintenance side for your residents, to try and help them solve some of their own problems.
Yeah.
So be able to do those types of things. But it's going to be starting to infiltrate every single product to the point where it's going to become so second nature to have AI involved in your applications that
Mm.
you almost won't even realize that it's AI anymore. You
Mm.
have these little assistants, if you will, that are going to just help you do your job
Mhm.
throughout all of everything that you're doing.
What I think I heard you say is there is a cause, just saying, for Roy to finish being executed properly. Our little chameleon. I'm just saying he makes a great assistant.
It's almost like the resurgence of Clippy. If those
I
that
know.
remember, it's like that little assistant that's right there on your side, waiting to help
Mhm.
you out.
Yeah. Now that you're, I know you're leading a team and you're heavily involved in the projects. Um, how do you feel like your experiences from a technology standpoint have prepared you to take on that role and kind of lead that part of the organization right now? I know you work with Ramon as well, and other team members, but this is it's a big initiative. It could be really impactful for our customers, but also internally, internal and external customers, right? Because we could utilize it internally as
Sure.
well. So how do you feel like your experiences have helped you, like, position you to take this on now?
Yeah. One of the big things that we're trying to accomplish, specifically with Inhabit as an organization, is we provide 40, 50 some odd different products and different services, right? So it's not like there's just a single application that you need to integrate something
Hmm.
into, but there's 30 or 40 of them. And so what we've really taken from an approach here is to build something that's more generally applicable that can then be
Hmm.
tailored towards the individual products. So from my experience, something that I think has helped in this process is, as you mentioned, on the ResMan side where I started, we've integrated with 300 some odd different partners out there where we've had to pull data, we had to integrate the systems, clearly some of them a lot deeper than others, but we had to work cross collaborate with those teams. And
Yeah.
this is the same type of concept here. As you're starting to drop AI into these different products, you're working with separate teams
Mhm.
that have different, from a technology standpoint, code bases or languages or
Yeah.
technologies. And so your every day is a little bit different because you're having to work with a different set of people or a different tech stack.
Yeah.
And really, that whole career and everything that I've done up to this point has been like that, bringing in other companies and helping people understand the processes. And it's just that integration process has really helped set us up to be able to start doing this project through a number of different products.
You've been preparing for this for the
For
last for your
years,
adult life because it's been with us.
decades.
So let's back up for a second and thinking about the audience in general. And like I said, the term AI is thrown around all over the
Sure.
place. So I thought it might be helpful if we kind of take a step back, because a lot of us hear AI and we think science fiction.
Right.
In fact, we talked about this. There's one of the years at OpTech that we had a survey that people who came by our booth had to fill out, and there was like 10 questions. And the last question was, I love technology, but I'm secretly afraid Skynet's going to take over the world. I don't know if you remember that.
Uh-huh.
Everybody answered true as a
Right.
true or false question.
Right.
So, like, maybe let's start with what actually is the reality of artificial intelligence, from a basic level, and how is that different from what we view as a computer program?
Sure. So there's kind of three different levels that I think we'll talk about here. And the base level is what you can refer to as traditional programming, right? Which your traditional programming is simple. Well, it can be complex, but rule based, right? So I get this input and I need to do something with it and spit this out as my output, right? It's very
Yeah.
prescriptive, very driven by the developer. I work with somebody that says I need the software to do this, and I program it to exactly do that, right?
Mhm.
And from a variation standpoint, you can't. Like if
Right.
something changes, you have to go rewrite the program or adjust it, or maybe you can build in some
Right.
variation there, but it's pretty solid and rigid, right? And then from an AI perspective, it's much more adaptive. And so specifically, if you talk about generative AI, which is what we're largely talking about nowadays with ChatGPT and Bard and all these other models that are out there, you aren't writing rules like you are in software as much as you're taking something that has learned from a whole massive amount of data, right? You know, for instance, ChatGPT, for instance, like essentially the entire internet, it's learned from the internet, and you're able to instruct it to do things, and it will, because of its training, react and respond to you in the most appropriate way that it seems fit. So instead of having to think about exactly, okay, in all of these particular flows, I need to make sure I handle A, B, and C, that's gone. Like, you don't have to deal with that anymore as much as you're just taking a trained artificial intelligence and instructing, asking it to do things for you, and it will figure out the best way to accomplish it.
Oh, so that's kind of like what we used to do with our focus groups. You just tell us what you need it to do. So it's basically you and I in the background. It's like, no, don't tell us the steps. You just tell us what we're trying to accomplish.
Tell us
We'll
the end
find
goal,
the best way
and we'll
for you.
figure out the best way to do it. No, it's true. It's true, but it gets away from those specific rules. You're not developing a set of rules to do something. You're letting the AI do it for you.
And so, is there another? So you've mentioned generative
yes.
AI.
Okay. So
there's a one before that.
Right. So if you break that down, I don't know what you want to call a name, a traditional AI, if you will, which is prior to the generative AI that we actually consume nowadays. So that traditional AI was really based on, still think of it kind of a middle ground there, where it was still pretty rules based. So if you had a specific thing that you wanted it to do, you may pass in thousands and tens of thousands, 100 different thousands examples of whatever you want it to do. And it will start to learn, but most of it is pattern matching. So if it sees something new, it may kind of say, oh, I think I've seen something like this before. And I can pattern match off of that and say, I know what to do because you told me from these hundreds of thousands of different examples.
If I see this pattern, do
this, right? And largely that's what that's doing. And this generative AI is a different approach where you don't have to train that. So let's take an example just to be specific. So you think of like a password generator, right? If you wanted to say, I need an application that generates me a password, right? So from a true traditional software development, some developer would ask the question, well, how long does it need to be? Does it need uppercase characters? Does it need symbols or what have you? And they would write the code to say, anytime I generate a password, make sure it has all of these conditions, and then it spits out some password.
Right.
But from an AI perspective, you're not having to actually write those rules. The AI has just been trained on all this massive amounts of data, and then you can just say, hey, in this case, like ChatGPT, for instance, like, give me a strong password. And based on its data that it's been trained on, it will just give you what it's learned to be the strong password and give you a response.
Oh, wow.
Does that make sense?
So my password generator, every time it asks me, would you like to use this password? Is that what's actually happening?
Yes, there's some developer at some point in time that said, these are all the rules that need to be done for a password. And then it generates one.
Yeah, I can never remember that. I don't know how good I don't know how well that's working out for everybody else in the world, but I have I have my personal passwords all secretly written and hidden in little places. I can't remember all those symbols and numbers and letters.
It's impossible.
It is a challenge. So if I was thinking about just the topic of AI as it relates to multifamily specifically, it seems like a couple of years, probably maybe 18, 19, we really started to hear it, maybe 17. But there were a few, players in the space that were coming to market and talking about AI. And I remember, going through trade show floors, and really when you dove into the products, it seemed like it wasn't what you're describing, at least these early phases. It was more of knowledge trees. And I think even we did something like that internally when we were looking at, our knowledge base articles and trying to help our customers. And so what that's the knowledge trees? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. So decision trees is usually what it's referring to.
Sorry, that's what it was.
Yeah. So when you think of a chat bot, for instance, that's, your prime example. That's what we see a lot in the space today. But you're right, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, people were coming out and saying we have an AI-driven chat bot, which is not wrong by any means. Like, that's not overstating it. But it was largely, as I mentioned, training that bot to say, if you see a question about a clogged sink, then these are probably what you should respond with.
Mhm.
And so you're fleshing out essentially all of the possible scenarios and questions that could
Right.
be asked and mapping it to the appropriate response. And so largely, if you go through that whole model and you are clicking and asking questions or what have you, it's going to spit back what it's been trained to tell
Right.
you. And from a generative standpoint, which is what we're seeing now, instead of you going in as the developer and having to say, here's all the possible questions that you're going to be asked,
Mhm.
here's 200,000 answers that we've seen in the past, give
Mhm.
the best one. Again, it's taking that vast amount of knowledge that it's got from the internet or whatever it's been trained on, and
Mhm.
it's determining the best answer. So if you go, for example, today, even just like ChatGPT, for instance, and go ask the question, you go log in and just ask, how do I fix a clogged sink? It'll give you 10 or 15 different options to try. And then
Mhm.
if you open a new window and ask it again, it's going to give you a different answer. Now, maybe that the topics are maybe like both of them say, "Hey, pour some boiling water down the drain," but it's going to say it in a different way, or it's going to generate the actual answer in a different way because it's actually mathematically determining the most appropriate answer based upon the question that you're asking it.
So if you're asking it in two different tabs,
Mhm.
basically two different instances, does it give you the different answers? Is it literally a learning? Is it has a nanosecond or what's even smaller than that? Learning occurred between the first time you asked it and the second time, so that it gives you a different answer.
It,
I've wondered that because I've tested it, and you're right, it
it's a
does do
different
that.
answer, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
no. So I wouldn't say that it's actually learning from its previous response that quickly from there,
Mhm.
but it's looking at your question, analyzing your question. Ultimately, it ends up all comes down to numbers, really. At
Mhm.
the end of the day, we won't get into that level of detail, but then it's applying that and saying, based on the input that I've received, what makes most sense to
Okay.
generate as far as the answer. But it's happening in real time
Mhm.
based on all of the data that it has. And so it's generating word by word what the most appropriate answer is mathematically based on its model. And so depending upon what it goes and reads into, it may generate a little bit different answer each time.
Hmm.
But I think that the biggest thing to understand there is even this traditional AI that we talked about that came out years ago was
Right.
still very rules based. It still required somebody to go in and say, here's largely all the possible things that can
Mhm.
happen, and here's what you're supposed to respond with.
Wow.
And nowadays, that's not the case because it's just learning from the vast amounts of knowledge that it has.
Yeah, it is incredible how fast things can be generated. Um, and it's not always correct either.
No.
Tense and there's
Yeah.
some words in there that don't make sense every now and then because I've noticed that. So
Uh-huh.
don't be blindly following and trusting everything that comes
Correct.
out.
Well, that's a good point. We'll talk about here in a minute for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and I think if we think about, we started a little bit on about this with 2017, uh, about the evolution of technology and property management, and of course, it goes without saying, the 2020 and 2021 really saw out of a true dire sense of urgency this change in attitude towards technology and adoption of AI
Mhm.
for at what state and different companies were at different states, whether it was already in, generative or it was the decision trees and chat bots, but everything was around figuring out the best ways and to engage remotely with
Mhm.
your customer base or even your employees. So now if we think about AI, how it goes forward, in our industry, and probably a little bit about why it's such a buzzword right now, because it definitely feels like, and I think you mentioned already about the entrance of Chat GPT or it becoming out of beta
Mhm.
and being made available to the mass public has really changed people's perception. And I think the attitude towards Chat GPT is different than what I saw before
Yeah.
when it comes to technology. Even the ones that were adopted rather quickly during the pandemic, those were kind of tried and true products out there. I don't know there was a lot of jumping onto brand new
Right.
entrants.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you talk a little bit about that, about what you're seeing about because you talk to a lot of customers and you've done a lot of research and work with various cabs within the organization about the attitude that we're seeing in property management professionals towards this technology in general.
Yeah. And I'd say this goes outside of even just property management. This is just
Okay.
in general, we're seeing this to be honest, odd approach to technology. So more often than not, when some sort of new technology comes out, you've got a lot of people that are super timid, right? To
Mhm.
say like, I'm just going to sit and watch and see what happens here for a bit because I'm a little bit afraid. I don't want to be the early adopter. I don't want
Right.
to, be the one that does something terrible and something goes wrong. Um, and that's been the pattern largely. You have like small startups or little
Mhm.
client or
Yeah.
little groups that will adopt something and they'll prove it out, they'll
Mhm.
mess it up, and then it'll evolve and it'll become more mature, and then you'll end up having large groups like a Microsoft or a
Yeah.
Google or someone that comes out with something that someone
Mhm.
now finally feels like, oh, okay, I feel safe about this, right? This
Mhm.
should be good. And we're seeing the opposite with this trend. Interestingly enough, to the point where our clients and then just in general the world is grasping at AI and saying like, this is my salvation, like this is what I need to turn to. I need this because this is going to solve all of my problems. And
Bingo.
which is a little bit scary, to be honest, because the reality is like this stuff is still brand new and
Mhm.
we don't 100% know exactly what it can do, what it will do. And without monitoring and being aware of what it's actually generating, like
Mhm.
there needs to be a little bit of hesitancy here to make sure that you're rolling it out correctly.
Yeah.
But it's this hype zone. We're still in this crazy hype that everybody wants it and everybody
Yeah.
thinks this is my silver bullet. Like this is what's going to fix everything, all of my problems.
Yeah, and I think you probably hit that nail on the head. I think that was the tone that I was definitely picking up, but even between NAA and NMHC OpTech event is the silver bullet. I think
Hmm.
the labor challenges that we continue to face as an industry are putting, continual strain on our employees. And I think well, number one, they got a couple things. One, we want to ease the burden on our employees,
Sure.
but also we have positions that we can't fill fast enough. So work's not getting done to the extent that it should.
Yeah.
Um, and I think people perceive that this is a very cheap way. So let's talk about that because people, from my conversations, I can tell you, I think there's a perception of this is a very low cost solution to bigger problems, and I just can't help but take a step back and go, is it? Is it really?
Yeah, I can tell you from someone who's actually implementing it, it's not low cost. Like there's definitely cost that's incurred here, and I want to make sure. I mean, I'm saying be hesitant, be careful, which is all true, but that doesn't mean stay away from it. Like
Hmm.
it is what's going to be the future, and it will not go away by any means.
That's here to stay.
Yeah, it's here to stay for sure, and it can help and augment your team. But to think that it's going to suddenly reduce all of your expenses and I no longer need people and this, that, and the other, like that's just the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah.
I think the most appropriate way to go about it is how do I use this to increase the efficiency of my existing team
Hmm.
and be able to try and do more with less,
Hmm.
but don't think of this as a replacement or a massive cost reduction
Yeah.
project or anything like that. Like this is going to be a tool that everybody has to use to be able to succeed. So we were at a conference, on AI conference a month or two ago, and one of the things that they brought up was, as you mentioned, labor shortages. We are moving into a world where there's more and more demand of workers. We need more people to do more things,
Hmm.
but population-wise, there's less people to do more work.
Mm.
And so something has to change because there's just not enough physically. You can't do it. And that this conference obviously was focused on AI. Their concept was this is it, right? Which I think is true. Like the ability to take one person
Hmm.
and turn them into 1.5 people because I can reduce the amount of time that they spend on certain projects
Right.
because I've got this assistant here that's helping me is 100% valid. And I think is going to be how we succeed going forward, which is important as organizations, whether you're tech, whether you're property management, I don't care who you are,
Mm.
to start looking at how do I leverage these things to make myself and my team more efficient so that I can do more work, get more done,
Yep.
and clearly become a better company.
Yeah, and I seem to remember when we were talking about this topic a couple of days ago. One of the things that you brought up that I thought was interesting, I was going to ask you to talk to, is about how a property management company that is researching and considering how AI may fit into their organization, like what advice do you have as far as like what's the right approach about utilizing this in house?
Yeah. One thing that we've seen is we've seen some organizations that have tried to just go like full lean in and like, how do I make AI do everything? And, try and make their teams start doing things that they normally do in a different way or change workflows or change procedures
Hmm.
to try and use AI. And more often than not, what we've seen is those fail when, you're trying to change someone's normal process and workflow, things don't get adopted because you know how it is, or you've been on site. I've seen it, right? It's just, you don't have time. Like sometimes even if something that you're doing takes a long time, if I know I can do it and I know I can do it in X amount of time and it's efficient in my mind because I know I can finish it and do it, then I'll do that. And I'll keep doing that until the day I die. If I have to try something totally new, it just totally throws everything off. So what we've seen most effective is, you know, right now, all of these AI models are really good at doing the repeatable, mundane tasks, you know, things that you don't want to do. And so what we try and teach our teams, and as we're walking through this, is like, think of all the things that you do during the day where you say, man, I really wish I could get someone else to do this for me. And at that point, there should be something that goes off in your mind that says, how can I leverage AI to do this? And if you don't have something built in your product already, you know, so maybe it's just, you don't have that product hasn't come out with it, you know, pull something up like a professional or commercial grade of ChatGPT or Bard or something like that, and ask it to do that repetitive task or whatever it is that you don't want to do. Right. And you'll be surprised, more often than not, it'll actually do it very well. And so that's been our biggest advice to people as they're adopting it, is maintain in the current workflows that people are doing. So just normal daily processes that you're doing, something that's repetitive, something that doesn't take a lot of thought, leverage it first there. And as you start seeing success there, teams will begin to think more, okay, how else can I use AI to help me? Right. So start there, small things.
And I wonder about like some of the perception out there about it. It's not something that you can just take and I was surprised. Let me back up. I was surprised when I just did some research on the amount of AI apps there are out there, like for everything, including creating PowerPoints and images, which I still think is way, way early. I haven't seen one of those that's decent. And all of you,
there's a few that have come out in the last couple of weeks, to be honest, that are crazy. Oh,
okay.
Man.
Well, maybe you can tell me those offline, but I'm just going to tell all of y'all that are trying to use those for your new profile pictures. I'm just telling you, it's obvious. Don't do that.
That's not real.
It's not real. When people are like, wow, you look so different, that is not necessarily a good thing.
Right.
Especially if you have 6 fingers.
Right.
Because I've seen that. Somebody didn't catch it. But I think about like how property management professionals may be thinking about, like, just slap it on. When you say about applying this to existing workflows, I would imagine there's some aspect that you can do your work here and then bring it over into another application. Are there instances where, you know, are on the back end, like even for ourselves, do we build an AI engine ourselves, or do we utilize other tools that are out in the industry? Not necessarily ChatGPT, which is, you know, a different beast, but like, what does that relationship actually look like?
So
does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. So as I mentioned, you'll start to see over the next 12 months, almost every product that you have, whatever you're using, personally or commercially, you'll probably see some sort of assistant type AI injection, right? So that'd be your first place to go if you have it. But if not, even talking, you know, pull software out of it for a minute and just think of your normal tasks. So think of you're trying to promote a community pool party, right? And you want to build a little flyer and you want to pass that and put that out on all the doors of your residents and trying to get them out, right? So you want some sort of jingle or some sort of fun thing to say on the invitation. You may sit there for 15 minutes like, oh, what am I going to say? Like, how do I word this? How do I do this? Yeah, exactly, right? I no joke. Like, open up, whether you want to use ChatGPT or whatever, right? You open something up and use that to bounce ideas off of, and just simply say something like, I need to host a community pool party for an apartment complex, and I'm going to have hot dogs and this, that, and the other. You know, write me some sort of little fun jingle that'll get people excited to come. And you'd be surprised, like, what things come back. And so that's the type of thing that I'm talking about as far as how do we utilize it now? Yeah. You know, if I don't have it in my product today, product X, Y, or Z, how do I utilize that?
Yeah.
Anytime you're stuck on anything and you're like, I'm not sure how to move forward with this, do it. Or so more from the finance side. I mean, something stupid. I think the other day, what was it? I had some Excel document or CSV document or something that I needed to transform from columns, and it needed to do X, Y, and Z. And like, I could have done it. It was just going to be a manual process to do it in Excel. and was able to take that and push it in and say, perform these operations on it. And then it spit back what I needed. And so, I mean, again, just like start looking at as far as adoption, if we're really trying to look at how we can help our teams be more efficient just in the day-to-day things that they're doing. Think of those things that are repetitive, those tasks that take a long time or just tedious, and leverage it there.
And it's pretty good with its own grammar and spell check, just saying. For our frontline team. Hey, I'm the world's worst. So I always say God gives in some areas and taketh away in others. You know what I'm talking about. I was like, what did she mean to say there? And what is that text actually trying to communicate?
100%.
It's like, so if I thinking about, some of our challenges with AI, and maybe we need to have, if this is too early, we can come back to it. But when I think about being in property management and just cutting my teams loose, like finding out that, they're using a variety of AI applications, I would imagine right now some conversations about the guardrails.
Correct.
Right. Because I know I've heard some companies, I heard one in particular that was like no chat GPT.
Right.
Like they have and in reality, I don't know how much you can really stop that because you can use personal login. So I don't know that they're actually accomplishing it. So it's probably, what would be your advice in that situation? Like, how do you approach this with our frontline teams?
No, I appreciate you bringing that up because as I was saying all of these things, I was thinking, oh man, I hope no one stops listening now and then just goes and does whatever they want, because there is a lot of risk if you don't do it correctly. So to your point, your personal, let's ChatGPT, everyone's using that one, right? If I just go to chat.openai.com and sign up for an account for free and just start putting whatever in there, like that is 100% public domain at that point. Whatever you put in is going to be in some form incorporated into their model. And so it is not advisable to just say, everybody go sign up for their personal free accounts and just go start putting whatever. The finance guys go start dropping in their financials for the property and asking questions about it. Like that is definitely not advisable. But there are commercial level agreements that you can sign that will be private instances, or they will still use the public model, but they will guarantee that your data isn't going to be used to train the model, or it won't be surfaced elsewhere. And so you bring up a good point. I don't think the days, this is crazy, they're saying that the days are over, because this has only been around for like 18 months as far as we know it now. Not even less than that, almost 14 months, 12 months. Anyway, the days of saying don't use it are gone, because everybody is so excited about it and they've seen the benefits that your teams are going to use these tools. And so it's more appropriate, in my opinion, to say, well, how do we let them use them in a controlled manner, which would be signing up for a corporate account, which would be, actually having an agreement in place that that if they're using it, they're going to use it under your corporate account, that information is safe. And so, just turning away and say, don't use it and then just hope no one does is not the way to go. Like, I would lean into it and adopt it, but use in a private instance something that's only going to be safe for your company.
Only because you were around back then, this is going to resonate with you, the story. When I heard this, I immediately had a flashback to being a parent of teenagers on early MySpace and Facebook and hearing parents say, oh, my kid doesn't have one of those. I was like, do you want me to show it to you? Because apparently you don't know, because they went to their friend's house and they set one up, unbeknownst to you. So
exactly. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's going to happen. And as we're putting more and more demand on our employees, they're going to turn to something to try and make their job easier. And as of right now, this is an amazing tool to use. And so as a parent, same thing. Like, I'd rather them using it under my supervision than just them using it without anyone else knowing.
Like, I'm thinking about, how do you roll out your policies? If I was going to embrace this and get a commercial account, were there resources, or are there resources already out there that you're aware of to help people think about how do you train your teams on how to just effectively utilize it? I think one of the things that I've seen from my own experiences is that people they don't take the time to educate ChatGPT first. So they'll blindly go in and ask the question, and they're not actually getting the best return, right, for what they're trying to do. And then sometimes they just blindly go with it.
Sure.
Whereas you can't underestimate the importance of really still using your brain and setting up, putting in content and then utilizing what you're trying to accomplish with the vast knowledge and data sets that it has to get, help you produce something, an output that you can maybe tweak or continue to use.
Yeah.
But I wondered about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen, I'm sure there are, to be honest, but I haven't seen or used, like a course, for instance, there's some sort of organized course to teach you how to do it. There's a billion blog
Or what
articles
to
and
do or
YouTube
what not to
videos. Yeah.
do.
I
Okay.
think one thing that is interesting as you're talking tangential to that, when you're talking about rolling it out, something that we have done in the past as well is ask your teams how they've used it. All
Yeah.
right. And if you can get them to admit that they have been using it, because more than likely they have. But that knowledge just within your existing teams already, if they have been, just saying, what have you done? What have you seen work? And then that also gives you a little bit of insight into how they're utilizing it so that you can then either from a training perspective, teach them the most appropriate way to do it, or help them, or just learn from each other. And so, I mean, keep the communication, lines of communication open and collaborative, and try and just make it an open forum, right? Make sure that everything's out in the open, and then that'll be the safest way to leverage it.
Well, and I think, so as we're talking about how your employees are going to be using it, I think we probably should talk about the fears of our employees, because, that's the other thing, as we continue to have these labor challenges and the high turnover rates that we do in multifamily, there's a lot of people that are concerned about, is AI, you've heard it, is the AI going to replace my job?
Right.
And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, the answer is yes, but with a caveat, right? So I think it's I say that as more of a shock factor than anything, but
oh, I'm sure people just fell out of their chair right now.
No. So I think of it this way. So if you think of it as this is a new iteration of the world in which we live. And I mean, one of the things that I've heard used as an example is think of when Excel came out. So before Excel existed, I mean, remember, I'm not going to remember. I may not be old enough for this, but from what I hear. No, I'm just kidding. Wow. So, but before then, right, you would have to, you'd be writing things down, you'd be tabulating them, you had your little adder machine, right, and it would go through and it would have your tape and you'd look at it, right? And so you do all of these things. And then Excel came out and these spreadsheeting tools, and everybody started adopting it. And I don't know, because I wasn't in the industry at that point, but my assumption is similar conversations were happening at that point in time. Like, oh, are we going to adopt this tool or not? Yeah. And you think now there is no way that anyone would do any sort of job, any sort of technical job that required numbers and math and financials without Excel or some variant, right? And I think this is the same type of concept where these AI tools are just going to be a tool to help every employee do their own job better. So how do I make sure I don't lose my job? Start adopting the tools that are available, the technological tools that are available to allow you to do your job better. Yeah. So if I were to hire someone that didn't know anything about Excel, or someone that did know something about Excel, and I needed them to do financial work, clearly I'm going to say the guy or the girl that's more versed in Excel is going to be more proficient in their job. And this is the same type of thing. And so I think for anyone who's sitting here thinking my job is going to be lost because AI is going to replace me, the challenge that I would say to them is, if you truly have that concern, figure out how you can leverage AI in your position to make you more valuable and more efficient. And it could be that parts of your job go away because you don't need a person to do that, but that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're going to go away. Yep. If you're the one that's learning how to use the tool effectively, your job position may change a little, but you'll still be there to be able to do that if you can do it. So the people that are potentially going to be replaced are the ones that I feel don't have anything to do with it. They don't want anything to do with it, and they're just going to sit there blindly as if nothing's going to happen, and if they don't adopt it.
I would almost characterize it from what you just said as, if you're open and willing to embrace change, imagine that, AI is your superhero. Yeah. It's your super companion, right? To help you be a rock star at your company. And if you're thinking about like how the industry will change, it's interesting. Like during the pandemic, we jumped to self-serve. It's been really interesting for me to engage with the vacation side of our company, and just got back from a conference there. And I would say that they've been ahead of us as far as adopting technology for self-serve. I mean, they've been ahead of multifamily in that regard.
Sure.
Lot more, well, almost completely hands off. But it's interesting how things have come back around because their focus right now, believe it or not, is back on the human experience.
Hmm.
And so if you are, utilizing these tools for what they are, which is to, decrease, get you out of the mundane. The same thing we did with the software. We wanted to unleash you from your computer, right?
Mm-hmm.
With ResMan when we started this, right? Get you away from all those administrative tasks because there's never enough time to do everything you need to do on property management ever. Like you could walk your property every single week. I know that's shocking, but it could be done and probably should be done. But there's an opportunity to think about how the community is going to change as a result of this, which I think is exciting because these are people's homes after all. And so I think anything that puts us back in providing quality living environments and experiences. And if this takes, a lot of the tedious things off your plate, then that just allows you to do more.
To be a better experience. And I think that's, along those same lines, something that's really important to recognize is from a corporate level that may be looking at this as like, oh, this is a great way to reduce cost. And I no longer have to do this, that, or the other. While that is true, you made the interesting comment here, the vacation side starting to turn more towards the experience. We need to make sure that even though we may be adopting some of these tools to try and respond quicker, respond more efficiently, to not lose the human touch. Right. At the end of the day, speaking of multifamily, right, like you got to have some sort of involvement of a person because this is still their home. This is where they're going to live. And me being a technology person, while I honestly don't strive to interact with people, at the end of the day, I know that somebody is providing a service to me if I'm living in that apartment complex and I want to know them. And so we've actually done some interesting studies and found that when you have AI assistants from a leasing perspective that are helping lease an apartment and answering questions. Like you can respond quicker. You're able to actually talk to more people, if you will. The AI, that's great. But from a closing perspective, it was actually more effective to have AI on the front end to help, but then to have an individual. And if you had an individual, a leasing agent, have some sort of interaction, a real person, you had a better closing ratio than if it was just 100% technology. And so I think to not lose that concept of just because we can, just because the technology is taking us there, doesn't mean we should necessarily, right?
Yep.
Like don't lose that human involvement because, again, you're providing a place where this person lives. It's a community. And they need to know that it's not just being driven by some random machine in the back end, but that there's actually people that are care about you and want you to live there. So have that combination. Make sure you don't lose that.
I think you make a good point because, again, you've highlighted several times how early we are in this cycle, right, of development and learning. And so what is the long-term effect for people that lean too heavy on AI and to supplement, labor shortages and think that the AI, as it continues to evolve, can do all aspects. Because I can tell you that's what we're seeing on the vacation side is that the companies that are performing, and they had, their year, 2023 was a more challenging year for them. That was their year to really level set. But they're finding that it's the good old-fashioned conversations, the little extras, those things that take time and humans to actually do are making all the difference in the property management companies on that side of the fence that are actually still performing and outperforming the competition. So
don't
full
lean
circle.
Don't lean too far into it, right? And again, that's just
it's not a set it and forget about it.
No. Well, and especially and you speak to how early we are. So there's a concept of what's called hallucinations in AI, especially with the generative AI concept here, where because it's not 100% rules based. And I know if I'm going to get input A, that I'm going to give you X or give you B back. It's you're kind of giving it this creative freedom to respond and to do things as needed. Like sometimes it'll just make stuff up, and you got to be careful, as to how far you lean in while it's still in its infancy. So, for instance, we've looked at or we're in the process of building leasing assistants, right, to help in the leasing process. And you feed it this information about the property to say, oh, it's got these amenities and it's got these prices, this availability, et cetera, just what you would a normal leasing agent, right? And if you don't put the appropriate guardrails in, we saw it start talking about swimming pools that didn't exist, right? Because it learned from the world where
people want swimming pools.
Generally speaking, apartment complexes have swimming pools. And so if someone asks about a swimming pool, yes, generally speaking, apartments have swimming pools. And so you have this concept of hallucinations where it thinks up its own ideas about what you're trying to train it to do. If you don't put those guardrails in place, you end up getting information that is true somewhere, but it may be not true in the context of what you're actually trying to do.
Oh,
And so
wow.
again, just some hesitancy on this to make sure that whatever you're adopting is monitored, that you're understanding what's coming out of it, and that you have some way to look back and audit in the event that something goes haywire. You can come back and fix it.
Yep. Which again, this is all just reinforcing this is not necessarily the end all be all silver bullet that I think people are wanting out of desperation. It's definitely something that needs to be part of your strategy.
Yep, definitely.
But keyword there is strategy. So just like anything else we have a strategy about, we talk about it.
Correct.
We have a plan. We think about, the SWOT analysis of all the good, bad, and ugly of utilizing it. So I hope if people can take one thing away from our conversation as we continue on is like it's worth taking that step back to think about it and understand it. Right. I was just curious too, is there how do you know if it's is there a place that rates them? I was thinking about this while you're talking about because of what you said about some things that have come out recently that have to do with generating images. Is there a place where you can see all of the different AI applications that are out there and like ratings as far as who's leading and who's not? Because all I hear about is ChatGPT.
Right. I mean, they're definitely the ones that are ahead at this point. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. I don't know if there is a rating. And to be honest, it'd be difficult because what's your rubric, right? I mean, depending upon what you're doing. And that's where I think it takes that research of understanding what's my end goal. Some things are going to be built specific for that. And then some things are going to be more general in nature. And that's that strategy of, okay, what let's do some analysis. Let's figure out a couple of these tools that we're going to use, which one performs the best according to what we need, and then roll that out slowly.
Oh, well, and you brought up a good point too. And this is probably going to lead us into our ethical conversation because when you said that there's a better, there's been some advances, right? The technology is moving so quickly and AI is developing so quickly when we talk about generating images, right? Because there's, we've already seen publicly that, recent events and media coverage ends up with images that people don't have legs,
right?
Or they have more fingers than they're supposed to, and it's an AI generated image. So let's talk about that too a little bit because I would think for me that'd be one of those concerns about just from AI, I guess as a space in general from a tech perspective, not necessarily Inhabit or multifamily, but just in general. How is the AI community talking about guardrails for itself? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, and that's even from a governmental perspective, that's obviously one of the big hot topics right now is, how from a legal perspective and governmental perspective are they going to put those regulations on and make sure that there's enough visibility into the process. So you'll see, it's going to take a long time though is the problem from actual regulatory standpoint. I mean, I think we're probably years away from having something that's actually in place to do that. So it really comes down to us as the consumer of it at this point to be able to understand how we want to leverage it. And I think that's because it is so early, I think that's where it comes down to you've got to decide your level of risk tolerance. Right? And
which in multifamily we have none.
None. So I would argue maybe, pop it up a notch, but to be honest, what is the risk worth it? And that's where I'd stay away from 100%, right? Stay away from anything that has to do with making decisions about people, right? Whether it's like a screening or even pricing, like those types of things where because we don't understand fully yet the complexities of what it can and what it will do, gear yourself more towards, as I was stating, like some of those more mundane things that you can easily see what the inputs are, what's going to come out of it. I can read it or look at it if it's an image, or I can do something with it and verify that it's what I want, and then go forward with it. And so it's there is this perception again that it will solve everything, and so we see some people that will just say, "Oh, I tried this once, and it worked perfectly, so I'm going to blindly do it 700 other times and just accept whatever I get back." Wow. And we're not at that point. Like it's nowhere safe enough to be able to do that at all.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but and we didn't talk about this because one of the things that I think we also started to hear at OpTech, and this is like maybe jumping too far back, but we're going to go there. The difference between an artificial intelligence and automated intelligence. Is there a difference about just automating processes? Is that just more of a traditional software program?
Yeah, I mean, your
versus
yeah, I don't know
the
if
generative AI.
correct. I mean, your
Okay.
automation is still very prescriptive as far as
Okay.
here's the rule set. Do A, B, C, and D. Maybe if I get this, then do this, then do this, then do that, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's that automation, which is still super helpful, right? Obviously, that's going to reduce cost of and time on certain things that you're doing. But it is this generative concept is unleashing the beast,
Mhm.
if you will, of I
Mhm.
don't really know exactly what the rules are behind the scenes, but I
Yep.
know I can tell it to go in a certain direction, and you know what? By golly, 99% of the time, it does exactly what I need.
Hmm.
But it is very different. It is
Yep.
very different because it's 100%
Hmm.
going on its own rules, if you
Okay.
will.
No, and I was trying to think about how that would relate because there's been conversations, and while we've been in the background, and you and your team are working on things for the future for Inhabit and our companies, and our solutions. There is a little bit of benefit because about the magnitude of what we're taking on, I think, compared to like just looking at how to utilize AI in a specific point solution
Correct.
or a specific workflow, whether it's just resident facing versus maintenance, like all these other things. Because now we benefit from them seeing kind of what's happening legislatively.
Mhm.
And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about like what is the concerns in multifamily that we're seeing about AI, and it's around screening, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it specifically has to do right with fair housing, right? As
Hmm.
anything is, honestly, but anything in
All things
multifamily
multifamily.
come back to fair housing, right?
Yep.
So a lot of it goes back to your traditional, AI or not, the things that you have to be concerned about from a regulatory standpoint to make sure you're
Hmm.
not violating. The
Yep.
the concern is now you don't have a brain behind it that's been trained on all of those regulations. You've got something that's just completely wide open, and if you don't direct it appropriately, then there's a
Mm.
possibility there's a violation. And so,
This keeps coming back to it's not hands off,
no, no,
right? We have to
no.
get in there, get our hands dirty. Um, and maybe just if we expand a little bit about this, a little bit more on this, when we're thinking about compliance, there's a lot of conversation about the ethics in AI, um, and how do we continue to use it responsibly. So, in your view, how important is it for companies to weave the ethical considerations into their AI deployment, and what are some effective ways to do that? And maybe we touched on it a little bit
Yeah,
just a second ago, but we talked mostly around screening. But
sure.
what about employee engagement? Internal stakeholders, things like that. Is there, anything that's come out of the conferences that you've attended or things that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So one of the things, and this is more not resident facing, but just your own internal company and culture and concerns, right? You raised the question of like, is this going to replace my job? Like, I guarantee you, 70% of your employees are thinking that right now, and they're trying to figure out like, oh, is this a problem? Am I going to have a job in a year? And so,
Considering we have like almost 70% churn at the height of the Great Resignation, that could be an
like,
impactful number, especially if they jump ship early.
from an ethical perspective, as far as your own employees, that's
Mhm.
why I think one of the biggest things that's important to do with this whole movement is to be open and upfront and have that conversation with
Mhm.
your employees to help them understand what's happening. What's your approach, right? If you're just silent about it and you start rolling out all of these AI tools, there's going to be potentially this perception that like, oh, here it is. It's here to replace my job, just like the
Yeah.
shopping checker at the grocery
Mhm.
store is gone. I'm going to be gone too. Be open about your strategy and your approach. And as we talked about before, help your employees understand how they can secure their position
Mm.
by starting to leverage some of these things and starting to
Yep.
become more efficient about it. So I don't know if that's exactly what we're talking about that's my first thought from an ethical perspective is
Mhm.
as you're adopting these, make sure you're transparent.
Yep.
And that builds a lot of confidence with your own teams
Yeah.
and help them understand how this is going to make them a better employee and how it's going to make them more efficient. That piece there, I'd say hugely important and part of your strategy as you're rolling it out.
Yep.
On the other side, as far as ethical when it comes to more resident facing, right? You know, your actual regulations and everything that comes out of it, it goes back to I think what we talked about
Yeah.
already is it's just
Be transparent about the
be
fact that it's
transparent that
an
it's
AI.
there and make sure you're staying away from anything that would make a decision about someone.
Mhm.
You know, we're not there yet, and I don't know if we ever will be. You want to have that human intervention there to make sure that things are being followed appropriately,
Hmm.
and just be cautious,
Mhm.
right? Be cautious about it.
Yep. Well, that's also great insights that you've provided so far. But I'd be remiss knowing the number of people that we actually have that listen to our prop talk. And we have several supplier partners and technology aficionados, if you will, that pay attention. And I was thinking back, and I wanted to make sure we carved out some time for this too, talking about the impact of AI in prop tech overall, like specifically startups. And, because
Yeah.
we've talked before about timing is everything,
Mhm.
and thinking about just what seemed like an insurmountable challenge to bring ResMan to market ourselves and everything that we had to overcome. And, but the landscape now is changing the development of prop tech, not just prop tech, but
In general, yeah.
in general, but we're here to talk about prop tech.
Yep.
So I wondered if you could shed some light on that,
Yeah.
what some of those concerns are that you shared, because I thought that was, pretty insightful.
Yeah, it's interesting. So in software specifically, in the tech industry, you're constantly battling change, right? So I mean, a lot of industries, things don't change for 20 years, and you just follow the same process for 20 years, and you're good to go because it works, and there's not a lot of innovation. Clearly, in technology, there's a lot of innovation, but we're used to historically, we're talking cycles of 6 months, 2 years, a year, something where some new framework or technology or approach will come out, and you're constantly looking to say, all right, well, how do we keep up with this? All right, we're probably good for another 18 months, and
Mhm.
then we got to start thinking about the next thing or what have you, right? But with the way that this is happening, like that cycle of whatever, 6 months to 24
Yeah.
months, whatever it is like shrinking down to weeks almost. The
Wow.
the technological advances that are happening with AI today are so rapid that from a development perspective, it's really hard to keep up. I mean, case in point was we are developing some of these solutions. We'll get through some of the process, and then 2 weeks later, some new feature comes out that one of the vendors that supplies these services comes out with it, almost invalidates everything that we were doing before because now suddenly it's all done for you.
Mm.
And so trying to keep up with that is difficult. And
Mhm.
you speak to some of the vendors in this space. I actually had a guy that I know this last summer that saw this whole wave, and he said, "All
Mhm.
right, I'm gonna capitalize on this, and I'm gonna use AI, and I'm gonna build tool X." This was it was a meeting summarization and integrated into Salesforce and other CRMs. And anyways, this whole tool that was for
Mhm.
trying to summarize and take all the information out of meetings, contextualize it, and then put it into some sort of case. And so he did that. They developed it. They developed it in a couple months. Everything was great, and they released it. And the next day, Salesforce came out with the exact same product,
Oh.
and
Oh.
they folded up shop, and they said,
Yeah.
I can't compete.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing this change that's happened where
Mm.
normally startups have driven innovation because they can be lean and nimble and they can make changes and they can release something. And then the big software companies in the world would take 2 or 3 years to catch up. But
Yeah.
you had this long runway where the innovation of the startups could run and go for it.
Be the disruptors. Yeah.
Right. But now, because this is the evolution is so fast and the development is fast from a relativity standpoint, the larger corporations that already have dominance can come in and just overtake these startups. And so it's a little bit sad to some degree, right? It's almost disrupting this normal flow that we've seen where it's the little guy that comes up that has this really cool thing,
Yeah.
but everybody's able to execute relatively quickly
Mm.
on this. And so it's an interesting question of what do you develop and what do you wait to be developed?
Mhm.
Because you wait 2 weeks and boom, there's going to be something new here and something new here, and so it's a strange space to be operating in right now.
Yeah.
Very different than we've seen ever that I've ever seen from a technology standpoint.
Wow. I would imagine to some degree that's got to be a little bit exciting for you too, to be this is your life, this is your career, right? And
It's
this
exciting, but it's also frustrating because you go, oh man, everything we just did, this just does it right here, and it's already done. But it is. It's fun to be part of something that is moving so fast, and it's
because it hasn't been that way before.
No, and it's fun to be part of something that, to this day, I mean, we've been using these tools for a year now, and to this day, I am still at least once a day almost falling out of my seat because of the things that AI is doing and saying, like, how did you know that I wanted to do that? And I'm almost yelling at my computer saying, like, this is just crazy. The things that it can learn and understand and do, like, just from my own efficiency standpoint, I'm able to do things significantly faster because I've almost got this other little bot sitting next to me that can do all those things.
Your new favorite companion, your new favorite favorite employee.
It's just, yeah, exactly, 100%.
So I could see where, those comments might lead customers to going, because I was the worst. Well, I'm just going to go back to a few lines of code, right? I can't tell you the number of times over the years I've gotten the look that you never said it, but you look like you wanted to strangle me. And I believed you.
Yes.
Because in my mind, I'm like, well, why can't we get it done by like next week? And you'd be like, no, that's like 4 months, 5 months of work at a minimum. And so I would imagine as software companies start, embracing tools and are able to take advantage of these, I think it's probably important to take a step back and maybe help users understand what's the reality of the impact to enhancements and being able to work with the existing platforms.
Sure.
Because I would hate to set the precedent that, everyone's like, in 2 weeks, I'm going to get every enhancment request I asked for.
Exactly.
all the other prop tech companies would also want to hang me if we don't address that.
That's true. No, you bring up a good point, and I think it really comes back to the monitoring, the understanding what it's actually going to do, the guardrails, and all of that. So to your point, like a lot of things you can do very quickly, and you can say, man, I'm going to incorporate this, and I could turn that around in a few weeks, but like you have to take the time that's necessary to make sure that it's done properly and that it's not going to go beyond the bounds of what you want it to do, and that you have the auditing and you have everything in place to be able to make sure that it stays within its own lane and it does specifically what you'd like it to do. And so
it doesn't impact other areas of the platform unexpectedly.
Correct. Yeah, because it's again, because you're unleashing the beast. I think I've said that before. It's you've got so much power that if you're not containing it within the confines of what you want to actually allow it to do, the impact can be great in a bad way, but it can be terrible, right? And so that's where I think as you see some of these companies rolling things out, while yes, the development cycle is faster, the smart companies are the ones that are actually taking the time to ensure that everything is done properly. And especially in a regulated space that we are, that it's done appropriately so that it's not going to do something that it shouldn't. Right. And that's, to be honest, that's what takes more time than the actual development of the feature. Right. It's the 90% case is really easy to solve. Like that's pretty straightforward. It's the 10% case that's going to get you sued. That's the part that you've got to really focus on. And that takes time. And that's not an easy thing.
Yeah. And I would imagine too that this, with regards to product management and product managers, I'm sure there's aspects that they could utilize to help in their workflows as well, but it's not replacing them either. No, it's still a complete product management life cycle. It's just finding those areas where it can expedite certain points.
Correct.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. Again, think of it as, you're hearing the term coined assistance. You're going to have assistance for a bunch of different things within all various products, and think of it that way. Think of it as having your own little personal assistant that helps you do your job better.
But don't give the assistant the keys to the kingdom.
Yes, don't do that.
I don't know. The whole time you were talking about this, all I kept picturing is, our mascot is Roy the chameleon. And how, I don't know, he turned into Godzilla while you were talking there for a second.
Right. Take over.
Unleash him, and he's out doing God knows what into the platform.
Who knows?
Oh, my gosh. Well, I hope everybody, found that this conversation was helpful. I certainly found that it was. And you are obviously a wealth of knowledge. And I was thinking about, like, for you and your future, is there anything that you want to share about, like, your, thinking about the future for Inhabit? Like, what does that look like in your eyes?
It's exciting, to be honest. I think the the biggest thing that I'm excited about is starting to see um, the combination of everything that we have at Inhabit coming together and moving forward together
Hmm.
as a more cohesive and single platform to be able to actually deliver everything from beginning to the end, right?
Hmm.
And there's a product that's there, and Inhabit has done a fantastic job over the last 5, 6, 7, 12 years, whatever it is, to bring these
Hmm.
all together. And now, especially as we've seen the adoption on the multifamily side of ResMan into the portfolio, to be able to start bringing these things together so that you
Yeah.
have a single solution that can provide everything. That to me is what's most exciting about it is we can provide everything. And
Hmm.
now it's our job to make sure that that feels seamless, to make sure
Hmm.
that we can actually have something that you're excited to work with, and that can be easy to work with, and not a
Yeah.
bunch of different fragmented things.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that it couldn't be better well timed, although we must have patience because we have to do it right. And I know everybody's chomping at the bit. You probably hear about it on a regular day, regular basis, right?
Yep.
But it's an exciting time from a technology standpoint. And I think that's probably a nice lift because as multifamily heads into 2024, it's more of a normalizing year. Whereas I thought we'd feel more of it this year. I think hearing from customers and prospects and peers in the industry almost felt like there was like wind knocked out of people as
Yeah.
they actually got those 2024 budgets to approve.
Yeah.
It's one thing to know we have challenges. It's another thing to see them in writing and to understand what your numbers look like. Um, so I think, this technology definitely has an opportunity to help us position ourselves for the future. I think the big takeaway I have is, and I hate to burst people's bubbles, but if you are coming out of optech and that environment and thought that the AI is your end all be all for your 2024 problems, that's not accurate, right? Um, and so don't get lost in that. Go back to your basics and remember, the things that when you stay true to your North Star, that's how you survive those more
Yep.
challenging times. So, but on the flip side, coming out of that 2025, 2026, there's already, some indicators that if we see the trends we expect to, the industry, is pulling back on permits and new construction, supply and demand may shift a little bit. So we will kind of get back to a more normalized ability for growth. And that's a great time to have
Sure.
products coming to market.
Yep. You betcha.
Not that we think about timing. Well, is there any parting thoughts you'd like to share with us
I,
about?
no, I think just as you stated, not necessarily the silver bullet, but then at the same time, don't ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
It's here to stay, and it can be amazingly helpful. Figure out how, from your team's perspective, how you can use it most safely,
Mm-hmm.
appropriately, and to help your teams become more efficient, because it's here to stay, and it's the future for sure.
Yep.
So make sure you're adopting it in some form that's appropriate for your organization.
Yep. Well, thanks for joining us. This was
Anytime.
awesome. I just enjoy getting to spend time with you as always. Hopefully, we got some good sound bites for our internal team members, so that they are very you're very much loved within the company.
Well, that's fun. Appreciate it.
Well, guys, thanks for joining us. Again, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you feel a little bit more knowledgeable about AI, if you were wondering. Nick definitely did a good job educating us all. To learn more about ResMan's property management platform and get more insights into the multifamily ecosystem, please check out myresman.com. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.